Well, abortion's back in the news again, and I mentioned in a previous video that I don't really like this issue, at least in America, because, um, it's so polarized and so emotional, and that's because both sides of this debate in America are dominated by women, and women have a lot of difficulty with like trade-offs and nuance, and looking at things in rational cost-benefit terms, and instead, they just do approval and disapproval. And furthermore, they think that the universe or God or, whatever the higher power is that they believe in always agrees with them. And so, if they disagree with something, it's not just wrong, but it's evil and disgusting. And so, if they disagree with abortion, then abortion is evil and disgusting, and you have to be absolutely against it. But if they disagree with abortion restrictions, then those are evil and disgusting, and you have to be absolutely against it. And so things tend to get polarized into the opposite extremes. And it's very hard to have a rational discussion about any of this. But here goes. The news lately about abortion revolves around these abortion bans in Georgia and Alabama. These are new bans, almost total bans with only a few exceptions. And, the aim of these seems to be to challenge Roe versus Wade and to get it overturned in the Supreme Court. And then on the other hand, you have New York and Illinois going to the opposite extremes and repealing abortion restrictions, on late term or partial birth abortion, so that it's now permitted for like the full 9 months of pregnancy with, almost no restrictions. And so you have states polarizing on this issue and, also challenging the federal hegemony on this issue, which will, the hope or the aim is to get it kicked back to the states as an issue and out of the federal purview. So the camps in this debate are traditionally characterized as pro-choice or pro-life. And I'm definitely not pro-choice, because to me the most important thing is that people do the right thing. Not that they have the freedom to choose necessarily. It could be important to give them the freedom to choose if that helps them to do the right thing. But if it doesn't, if it helps them to do the wrong thing, then that choice, giving them that choice, is counterproductive. So I'm definitely not pro-choice in the sense that I don't think choice is the highest principle here, or the thing that's most worth defending. Doing the right thing is the highest principle, the thing that's most worth defending. And I would say that I'm pro-life. I'm alive. I like being alive. I want to see thriving and flourishing generally. And, life is the struggle against entropy. Life is, the fish swimming upstream to spawn a new generation. And, that's a metaphor not only for life, but for progress, for civilization. All of these things, all of the good things represent struggles against entropy. And, that's what it means to be pro-life. And in contrast, these leftists are anti-life. They're pro-death. They revel in death. They glorify death. Everything they strive for, they serve entropy. They fight for entropy. They are agents of decay and destruction and dysgenia and degeneracy and decline, and everything is going down into the sewer with leftists, and going down into the muck and mire of some kind of primordial devolution to like more and more primitive forms, and ultimately to nothing. And that's the direction of leftism, is with entropy, for entropy, not against. Life is against entropy. Progress is against entropy. Civilization is against entropy. Leftism is always for entropy, with entropy. And, that's the difference between being pro-life and being a leftist, an anti-life, death-worshipping leftist. And they're positively ghoulish about it sometimes, especially the sadistic glee they pour into, like, issues like abortion, where they seem to celebrate, terminating pregnancy for its own sake, and a lot of other things that are similarly grotesque. And so definitely pro-life, definitely not pro-choice. So But I fall out of line with the broader anti-abortion camp in that my pro-life outlook is not based on the sanctity of life. And it's unfortunate that at least one of these recent bans, and maybe both of them, I can't remember which or if it was both, are specifically couched in terms of the sanctity of life. And especially when we have all these living leftists, running around serving death and serving entropy and contrary to life, sanctifying their particular individual lives. It's not really something I can get behind, because I think that's counterproductive in terms of a broader pro-life orientation. And we go too far in the direction of sanctifying individual lives rather than celebrating, life itself and the struggle against entropy, including against its agents, many of whom happen to be alive. And so it's counterproductive to sanctify their lives in particular. That's why I can't get behind the sanctity of life. And I think that's a weak foundation on which to put these bills and on which to base, a policy. And I would have liked to see these restrictions contain a few more exceptions, these new abortion bans. The Alabama one's almost a total ban, except for, cases where the health or life of the mother is threatened, or the fetus has a fatal anomaly, which basically means that it's dead or it's going to die. Then, it pretty obviously serves life in those cases to, abort that fetus if it's going to be a threat to the mother, if it's already dead. That can pretty obviously be a pro-life abortion in those cases. But I think there are a few other cases as well where that is the case, where a pro-life outlook is better served by the abortion than by an abortion restriction. And, to me, that's the important point. I don't think the natural law has anything to say about abortion per se, right? As such, the natural law is be fruitful and multiply, or survive and reproduce. And sometimes that is better served by the abortion than by an abortion restriction. Although in the great majority of cases, obviously an abortion restriction is more consistent with those principles than an abortion would be. And so an abortion restriction is a valid thing. An abortion ban is a valid thing to enact up to a point. It's just that there are a few exceptions. And I would have liked to see one or two more in these particular bills, the Alabama bill and the Georgia bill. And the fact that they put the health of the mother exception, indicates that either they accept this to an extent that pro-life and sanctity of life are not necessarily exactly the same thing, or they felt they couldn't get it passed without putting these concessions in, and so that there's some opposition to these bans that they were trying to appease by putting these concessions in. Either one of these things is encouraging. It means, if you can get one exception in, you can get two or three, and that's really all I'm asking for, all I would want. Other than that, I'm pretty happy about the direction things are going with the Georgia and Alabama bills in particular. With the New York and Illinois things, not so much. But my objection there is different. See, with New Yorkers and Illinoisans, I would want to be able to abort them a lot longer than 9 months. So I don't think those easing of restrictions goes far enough in those cases. But as far as the Georgia and Alabama bills go, the Georgia one does include an exception for rape. And that's another valid exception, I think, to these abortion bans, because, if you don't permit that exception, you're mandating cuckery to some extent. You're trying to cuck somebody with this law, by making them raise offspring that are not theirs or that they didn't want, and that they were, involuntarily saddled with through no choice of their own. Obviously, that's an oversimplification. There can be boundary cases there. But generally speaking, this law permits or even mandates cuckery in some cases by not having the rape exception in Alabama. In Georgia, they do have the rape exception. So they call the Georgia one the heartbeat bill because it restricts abortion after 6 weeks, which is when the heartbeat is supposedly audible, but there's a longer window in the case of rape where you may abort. There is a rape exception. And really the only other exception besides those that I would want, you got the health of the mother, where if the health of the mother is threatened, obviously the mother is more valuable than a brand new fetus in most cases. And so you would want to save the life of the mother so that she can go on to have other children. That's the course that's most consistent with being pro-life. And in the case of rape, this is something where if you're prohibiting abortion in the case of rape, you're mandating cuckery, which is a parasitic reproductive strategy, possibly a reproductive strategy of desperation, and therefore one you don't want to reward with success for eugenic reasons. And so that would be a good exception to have, and not having that is more in line with like leftist values of dysgenia and decay and decline than with civilized, progressive, pro-life, right-wing values of improvement and uplift and thriving and flourishing. And the only other one I would want to see is an exception for cases of deformity or retardation, or what you would call eugenic cases, where if you terminate the life of a defective unborn child, maybe those parents can afford to have several healthy ones, that are actually going to grow up to contribute to society in a much more, substantive way than that one defective child. But, if you're using the sanctity of life, which I think is a faulty foundation to put these principles on, to deny that or prevent that, I think that's contrary to a sensible, rational, pro-life orientation. So I have some little quibbles with these bills. I am happy about them overall. I don't necessarily like the foundations that they're on. I don't necessarily like that they don't have all of the exceptions that I would want. They do have some exceptions, and that is encouraging, for obtaining others, and just that it's not absolutism altogether. It's not totally one side or the other, polarized, irrational polarization. So, I'd say I'm happy overall with the way things are going, and I hope that this stuff can be successfully challenged in the Supreme Court, that Roe versus Wade can be overturned, because that was a bad ruling that empowered an activist central government, controlled by these degenerate, urbanite, death-worshipping, pro-entropy leftist cult members, that empowered the federal government with this toxic and perverse stew of urbanite ideologies to impose on the entire country and shove it down their throats whether they wanted it or not. So Roe versus Wade was a bad decision. I'm hoping this can get overturned. My fiance thinks this is going to be counterproductive, like taking up this issue now is going to spook women or alienate women who voted for Trump and cost him the re-election or whatever. I'm not so sure. I think progs are doing their best to disgust normies, with their hysterics and their bullshit over this issue. And so, they're going hard in the opposite direction. And I think they're going to disgust and alienate a lot of normies, including normie women, and especially the ones who are already against abortion. So, who knows how that's going to go. I don't know how that's going to go, but, those are the possibilities there. And, we'll just see how this plays out. But, if you like the channel, please like, share, subscribe, or click one of the links below to support. Talk to you later.